Right now, at this exact second, their brain is trying to solve a puzzle it wasn't designed to handle. For days, weeks, maybe even months, you were a constant variable in their subconscious math. You reached out, you checked in, you overanalyzed, you adjusted your behavior to fit their tempo. In behavioral science, we call this predictable reinforcement. You taught their central nervous system that no matter how distant, inconsistent, or emotionally dismissive they became, your energy was guaranteed. You were an ambient background hum in their life, always running, never requiring effort on their end. And then, you stopped. No drama, no long paragraph explaining why, no emotional exit speech. You just vanished from the equation. Do you know what happens to a human brain when a predictable pattern abruptly breaks? It doesn't move on. It enters a state of high alert friction. At first, their ego tells them it's a fluke. They'll reach out by tonight. But as hours turn into days, that confidence degrades into severe cognitive dissonance. Their subconscious mind flags your sudden silence not as peace, but as a severe threat to their perceived status. They are realizing in real time that the power dynamic just flipped upside down. In the next few minutes, I am going to decode the exact four-stage psychological spiral this person is entering right now, and the specific subtle moves they are about to make to pull you back under control. If you turn this video off now, or if you react to their upcoming tactics without understanding the mechanics behind them, you will hand back every single ounce of leverage you just gained. But if you stay, watch every second, and learn to read the behavioral pattern unfolding behind the scenes, you won't just win your power back, you will permanently change the way you interact with human dynamic forever. Pay close attention. Here is what they are going to do next. Look at me very carefully. Every human interaction operates on a baseline. When you chase someone, you establish a baseline of high investment and low requirement. You make yourself easy to process. But the moment you withhold that expected attention, the brain of the person on the receiving end experiences a sudden drop in control. Most people think that stopping the chase is just a passive decision. It isn't. In practical behavioral terms, it is an aggressive disruption of their expectations. Right now, this person is realizing that the emotional security blanket you provided has been yanked away. They aren't just missing your presence, their baseline reality has just been shattered. If you want to understand how to navigate this without falling into their trap, you need to understand the four tactical phases they are about to execute. The first thing they will do is conduct what we call a covert audit. They won't text you directly yet. Their ego won't allow it. Instead, they will search for indicators of your status. They will check your social media profiles, monitor your updates, or glance at your online status. They are searching for leaks. They want to see if your silence is caused by anger, pain, or strategic posturing, because emotional distress still proves you care. When the silence audit yields no clear answers, their anxiety escalates. This is where they test your resolve with a low-risk, high-reward move. Expect a random message. A casual, "Hey," a late-night view on your story, a reference to an inside joke, or a question about something completely irrelevant that they could easily have looked up themselves. This is not an apology. This is a probe. They are fishing for a fast response to prove to themselves that you are still on the hook. If you respond within seconds with enthusiastic energy, the baseline resets instantly, and they regain complete control while offering zero commitment. If you remain calm, measured, and unhurried, or if you choose not to engage with low-effort probes, their frustration will peak. Recognize these for what they truly are: defensive maneuvers from an individual who has lost control of the dynamic. Here is the ultimate reality you must internalize today. You did not stop chasing to play a game. You stopped chasing because your time, focus, and energy are finite assets that belong only to dynamics that yield high mutual respect and effort. When you stop chasing, you stop negotiating your self-worth. Let them run their loops. Let them send their probes. You remain grounded, composed, and laser-focused on your own mission and growth. You have reclaimed your position of strength. Never lower your standards to return to a place you had to outgrow. Look at me very carefully and understand how human perception actually works under the hood. Every human interaction operates on an invisible baseline, a deeply ingrained, subconscious set of rules and expectations that both parties construct over time. When you pursue someone, when you send the extra text, when you initiate the check-in, or when you constantly adjust your emotional state to fit their unpredictable tempo, you are actively training their brain. You are establishing a baseline of high personal investment paired with zero cost on their end. In behavioral science and nonverbal analysis, this creates what we call an absolute prediction model. Their nervous system becomes completely accustomed to your presence, your accessibility, and your predictable reactions. You become an ambient background variable in their life, always running, always accessible, and entirely risk-free. Because you are constantly available, your perceived value drops to zero, because the human mind only assigns high value to resources that require effort, boundaries, or real investment to obtain. And then, without a dramatic confrontation, without a tearful confrontation, and without sending a 4-paragraph exit essay explaining your feelings, you execute a total baseline shift. You simply stop. What happens in their mind at that precise millisecond is not logic. It is a violent disruption of their subconscious expectation framework. Human beings rely heavily on environmental predictability to maintain a sense of internal control. When a source of attention that was once guaranteed suddenly vanishes, the brain instantly flags that absence as an anomaly. At first, their conscious mind attempts to defend their ego. They tell themselves it is a temporary glitch, a busy afternoon, or a minor mood swing on your end. They convince themselves that you will inevitably break, reach out, or yield to the silence by the end of the day, because that is what your historical pattern dictates. However, as time moves forward and the silence remains unbroken, that initial arrogance decays into acute cognitive dissonance. The brain cannot tolerate an unresolved pattern break. The sudden absence of your baseline behavior creates an immediate psychological void. Their subconscious begins demanding answers to a very specific, destabilizing question. What changed? Did you suddenly see through them? Did you find someone else? Did you simply lose interest? Did you regain your standards? This shift in baseline completely reverses the psychological pressure. The anxiety, hyper-awareness, and emotional monitoring that used to consume your daily focus instantly transfers to them. You are no longer the one trying to solve an unpredictable puzzle. You have become the puzzle itself. By abruptly cutting off the predictable feed of attention, you force their mind out of passive comfort and directly into a state of high-alert evaluation, leaving them completely destabilized by the sudden vacuum where your chase used to be. Once the brain recognizes that a baseline pattern has been broken, it immediately enters the second phase of behavioral disruption, the threat response and anxiety loop. To understand this phase, you have to realize that human beings are fundamentally loss-averse creatures. We are far more driven by the threat of losing something we already possessed, even something we took completely for granted, than we are by the prospect of gaining something new. When you stopped chasing, you didn't just take away your attention, you revoked their perceived ownership over your time, your emotional energy, and your focus. That revocation is processed by their primitive survival architecture as a direct threat to their status, ego, and sense of control. This is the exact point where their internal psychological dynamic flips into overdrive. The confidence they previously displayed was entirely built on the guarantee of your availability. Strip that guarantee away, and the illusion of their detachment shatters instantly. Their subconscious enters a state of hypervigilance. They begin experiencing an obsessive feedback loop, a repetitive series of intrusive thoughts designed to resolve the uncertainty you have created. They will replay your last few interactions in their mind, analyzing your tone, your body language, the length of your messages, and the precise timing of your last exchange, desperately searching for the exact moment the shift occurred. They are trying to locate the leak in their control model. But because your departure was clean and quiet, there is no emotional data for them to parse. This lack of data feeds the anxiety loop further. In behavioral psychology, an unreadable subject creates maximum cognitive strain. Because they cannot determine what you are thinking or feeling, their brain begins to fill the void with high-threat scenarios. They begin to entertain the possibility that you have completely outgrown them, that your value has surpassed theirs, or that someone else has captured your attention. This realization destabilizes their ego profoundly. The passive, comfortable position they occupied, where they could take your effort for granted while offering nothing in return, has completely collapsed. They are now forced to sit with the uncomfortable reality that they are no longer the primary author of this dynamic. As the anxiety loop tightens, their behavior will involuntarily begin to leak indicators of distress. They will engage in silent, hyper-fixated monitoring. They will refresh your social media profiles, check your messaging activity, and keep tabs on your digital footprint, searching for any subtle microsignal that proves you are still hurting, still thinking about them, or still emotionally invested. Every hour that passes without a sign of weakness from you acts as a multiplier to their psychological discomfort. What they are experiencing in this phase is not necessarily love or genuine affection. It is the raw, destabilizing panic of lost leverage. They are realizing, with absolute clarity, that the leash they thought they held was never actually tied to anything, and that their complete control over your mind was nothing more than an illusion sustained entirely by your choice to participate. When the threat response and anxiety loop reach a boiling point, the subconscious mind demands action to relieve the internal tension, shifting them directly into the phase of escalation and test contacts. You must understand that a person who has lost leverage will rarely initiate contact with an honest, vulnerable admission of their mistakes or a sincere desire to make amends. Their immediate objective is not repair, it is reconnaissance. Their primary goal is to execute a series of calculated microprobes, subtle, low-investment maneuvers designed specifically to test your emotional temperature, measure your current boundaries, and see if they can easily pull you back into the familiar, predictable pattern of chasing them without having to offer any genuine effort or change in return. These test contacts will almost always appear casual, random, or entirely trivial on the surface, which is precisely why they are so dangerous if you do not know how to read the underlying mechanics. They might send a brief, late-night text containing nothing more than a single word, a random emoji, or a simple question about something completely mundane that they could easily have looked up themselves. They might watch your social media stories within seconds of you posting them, like an old photograph from months ago, or send a vague, inside joke reference with zero context. In elite behavioral analysis, these are classified as low-cost pings. The strategy behind a low-cost ping is simple. Spend as close to zero personal effort as possible to trigger a massive emotional response from you. If you swallow the bait, if you reply instantly, send a long paragraph, or express overwhelming excitement that they finally reached out, you instantly hand them all of their lost leverage back on a silver platter. You prove to their ego that your silence was just a temporary performance, that you were waiting by the phone all along, and that the baseline of high investment and low requirement remains completely intact. If these initial low-cost pings fail to elicit a reaction, the escalation begins. The psychological pressure forces them to increase the intensity of their probes. They may pivot into manufactured emergencies, claiming they urgently need your advice or assistance on a matter only you can solve, attempting to leverage your innate empathy against you. Alternatively, they may adopt a provocative stance, dropping subtle hints of moving on, spending time with new people, or posting deliberate content intended to spark jealousy, insecurity, or a defensive reaction. In some cases, they will reverse the narrative entirely, accusing you of being cold, distant, or playing games, attempting to provoke you into defending your character. Every single one of these tactics is a carefully disguised probe. They are throwing emotional hooks into the water, frantically waiting for you to bite so they can reestablish emotional dominance and confirm that you are still anchored to their orbit. When their test contacts fail to hook you, and their frantic attempts at escalation hit a wall of absolute composure, the dynamic undergoes a fundamental, permanent structural shift known as the power inversion. Up until this point, they operated under the subconscious assumption that your attention was a cheap, unlimited commodity. But by remaining completely calm, unbothered, and unresponsive to their low-effort probes, you shatter that illusion entirely. You introduce a reality that their ego was completely unprepared for, the realization that your presence in their life was never a permanent guarantee, but a privilege tied directly to mutual respect, high standards, and genuine investment. In behavioral science and high-stakes negotiation, power belongs entirely to the individual who needs the outcome less. When you stop reacting, stop explaining yourself, and stop seeking their validation, you demonstrate an absolute lack of needy attachment. This creates a massive shift in perceived status. Before this moment, you were the pursuer, placing them on a pedestal and giving them complete authority over the emotional climate of the interaction. Now, through the simple act of sustained detachment, you step off the bottom of that hierarchy and place yourself squarely above it. Your silence is no longer interpreted as bitter resentment or passive-aggressive gamesmanship. It is recognized as the cold, resolute baseline of a high-value individual who has higher priorities than playing trivial games for someone else's ego. This inversion forces them to confront a profoundly uncomfortable truth about their own value. They begin to realize that the importance, magnetism, and allure they felt while you were pursuing them did not actually originate from within themselves. It was a direct reflection of the intensity and focus you were pouring into them. Deprived of your emotional energy, they are left standing in a stark, hollow reality, realizing that without your attention, their perceived dominance vanishes into thin air. The dynamic completely flips. The person who once felt completely secure in taking you for granted is now consumed by a persistent, nagging sense of inadequacy and regret. What makes the power inversion so absolute is that it cannot be faked or manufactured through quick tactics or dramatic displays. It occurs naturally when your internal valuation of your own time, mental clarity, and self-respect finally exceeds your desire for their approval. As you maintain this unshakable stance, every attempt they make to manipulate, provoke, or test you only solidifies your advantage, proving that their influence over your psychological state has been rendered completely powerless. Reclaiming command is not merely about managing the actions of another person. It is about establishing an ironclad, non-negotiable sovereignty over your own internal state, attention, and trajectory. Once you understand the mechanics behind their baseline disruption, anxiety loops, and calculated test contacts, the entire dynamic ceases to be an emotional crisis and becomes a predictable behavioral display. Reclaiming command means shifting your operational mindset from reactive survival to absolute strategic clarity, ensuring that you never again surrender your peace, energy, or self-worth to someone who treats your presence as an option. To maintain absolute command, you must execute a complete audit of your behavioral leaks. The human mind naturally looks for validation, but every time you check their profile, replay past conversations in your head, or ask mutual contacts about their well-being, you are leaking cognitive energy back into a dead dynamic. True power requires a clean, absolute cutoff of that mental drain. When a low-investment ping arrives, a late-night text, a subtle story view, or an artificial emergency, you must view it through a cold, analytical lens. Recognize it instantly for what it is, a low-effort attempt to harvest your emotional energy to soothe their destabilized ego. Your response must be governed by strict emotional discipline. If a response is required at all, it should be delayed, brief, hyperfactual, and completely stripped of warmth, anger, or subtext. If no response is warranted, your complete, unbothered silence speaks with far more authority than any argument ever could. Furthermore, reclaiming command demands that you immediately redirect the massive surplus of time and emotional bandwidth you previously burned on chasing them into your own personal mastery. The energy that was once consumed by anxiety, overanalysis, and constant pursuit must now be funneled directly into your physical discipline, professional ambition, intellect, and core mission. You do not step back to make them miss you. You step back because you have recognized that your life force is far too valuable to be wasted on lower standard interactions. You build an internal reality so solid, purpose-driven, and fulfilling that the shallow games of insecure individuals cannot even register on your radar. When you reclaim absolute command, you permanently alter the terms on which people are allowed to access your life. You establish a clear, unwavering boundary that communicates, without saying a single word, that your presence must be earned through high investment, consistent respect, and unwavering integrity. You cease to be a participant in their manipulative cycles, standing firmly as the sole architect of your own focus, dignity, and future.